Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers of this channel. My name is Sean, and today we gotta talk about another update to the Supermayor story. One that I was definitely not expecting, but I'm absolutely not surprised about. What we're talking about today is the fact that acting police chief, puppet of the Supermayor, Lewis Lacey, has just been indicted on bankruptcy fraud, and while this might sound familiar because Keith Freeman, the other top ally of the Supermayor, who has since flipped on her, was indicted, that was also due to bankruptcy fraud. But this, just like the previous one, I believe is a mechanism in order to get Lewis Lacey to flip on the Supermayor so we can find out where the money is. And by the way, this might just be the beginning for this individual because we found out some very sketchy things about his office through the Lightfoot report that may have also played a role in securing this indictment. But before we get into that, I want to thank everyone who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
Starting off with breaking news here at 6, the acting police chief of Dalton now facing federal charges. A grand jury indicted him on bankruptcy fraud charges today.
He's a close ally of Dalton's embattled Mayor Tiffany Henyard and the second of her top aides to face a federal indictment.
So just as the local news said, and like I told you in the open, this is the second ally of the Supermayor who has been indicted for bankruptcy fraud. And if you'll remember, Keith Freeman said that he didn't work for the village of Dalton, he only worked for the Thornton Township.
But this indictment on one count of bankruptcy fraud says Freeman falsely stated he only worked for the township and made just over $99,000 last year. Prosecutors say he tried to hide his Dalton earnings via a pass-through company, which brought his income to $195,000 last year.
Which essentially halved his income during his bankruptcy case, and he also had a bunch of different sketchy shell corporations where he appeared to be hiding money, and all of this eventually led to, I believe, him flipping on the Supermayor because she decided that she was going to fire him suddenly.
Keith Freeman is fired from the village of Dalton.
But then, seemingly out of nowhere, if you're not paying attention, the Dalton trustees decided that they were going to protect him. However, Lewis Lacey is actually an even more ridiculous case because what we find out through the course of this indictment is that Lewis Lacey has filed for bankruptcy, not completed bankruptcy, but filed for bankruptcy a total of 7 times in his lifetime. Now, the reason why you would do something like this is because when you file for bankruptcy, that stalls all debt collection, stalls all legal cases against you of a civil nature. And this is a man who has a lot of corruption in his background, a lot of lawsuits against him, and a lot of judgments against him, which is particularly impressive for a police officer when you consider qualified immunity as a civil immunity doctrine, not criminal immunity, which is something a lot of people get wrong, that this guy actually lost cases in civil court as a police officer due to his excessive force.
He currently has 3 active lawsuits against him. All 3 of them allege violations of the Constitution for the acts he is committing. Let me share some of his past actions with you so you can get a picture of the man he is. Let's start with his petty incidents. One of his reports details him threatening the water company over a $300 bill he didn't want to pay. He's also known for trying not to pay tolls when he drives through them. But things get more serious. Many residents have banded together to note his excessive use of force and his use of the taser. In a 2012 incident, he was sued for 4th Amendment constitutional violations due to excessive force. Lacey lost this case and the judge ordered payment of $12,000 for the incident.
Now that was a different clip than the one that we used from Tommy G's documentary on the Supermayor. Normally we focus on the fact that the police chief along with a bunch of different officers are harassing this individual, they're forcing him out, they're not letting him cover the story because obviously this guy has no respect for the First Amendment. But what I wanted you to take away from that is that one of the lawsuits that this guy actually lost in court, again, with qualified immunity being a thing that exists, is an excessive force claim for his use of a taser, because that's how bad of a cop he actually is. So no surprise, this guy with this sketchy past ultimately ends up being the person that gets appointed as the acting police chief in the village of Dalton, because he's clearly and obviously comfortable with criminality. However, what actually went down in this particular case is far more absurd. Not as violent, obviously, but definitely more absurd.
Ben and Micah, Deputy Chief Lewis Lacey indicted on bankruptcy fraud charges. He's accused of concealing his income from creditors, filing misleading statements as they sought to recoup nearly $90,000 in unpaid debts, this all dating back to 2015.
Well, the local news gives us a quick summary, bullet points, if you will, of some of the charges or some of the allegations or some of the allegations.
False allegations and not facts.
Against acting police chief Lacey, but honestly, that is too superficial for me on this channel, and it should be too superficial for you guys out there in the audience. So what I actually have is a copy of the indictment that was leveled against him. And one of the great things about this is that a bunch of these statements are repeated, so we don't even have to go through all 24 pages. We just need to focus on the initial counts because, again, as you go through, most of them just repeat over and over and over again. So this goes all the way back to July 22nd, 2015, where a case was filed against Lacey seeking a judgment in the amount of $88,800. This is referred to as the state case. On or about February 7th, 2017, Lacey entered into a settlement in the case, which he agreed to pay the plaintiff approximately $55,000. This is referred to as the settlement agreement from this point forward. Now, on or about June 19th, 2019, the plaintiff in the state case filed a motion to enforce the settlement agreement, alleging that Lacey was in default and there was a failure to pay about $43,000 of the amount due. The circuit court set the status of the case on August 2nd, 2019 to address the plaintiff's motion to enforce the settlement agreement. Now look, I tried to define the terms so you guys could understand that, but here are the basics. Lacey was sued. He was sued for about $88,000. During the course of that lawsuit, he ended up reaching a settlement agreement with the plaintiff where he agreed to pay $55,000. However, after only paying $12,000 of that $55,000 settlement, he stopped making payments and the plaintiff decided to go back to court to get a judgment against him because he was delinquent, and then we had a case that was to be brought to the court on August 2nd, 2019 to adjudicate this matter.
He's also charged with making false statements and perjury. Lacey is a close ally of Dalton Mayor Tiffany Henyard, the second one to be indicted on bankruptcy fraud.
Now, it's also very important that it's laid out right here in the court documents that Lacey has a habit in these type of circumstances of filing for bankruptcy. In fact, it says he filed, like I said in the open, 7 bankruptcy cases between 1984 and the date that we're talking about in 2019. And this was what his plan was going to be. It's what his plan always is, because this, of course, stays all these cases, delays them, and stalls creditors from collecting any payments as the bankruptcy is being adjudicated. Now, to be clear, you can only go through bankruptcy once in your life as an individual. As a company, you can do it a bunch of times, or as an owner of a company, you could do it a bunch of times, but you're only supposed to do this once, so eventually these bankruptcy cases fall apart, but the delay is what he is seeking out as a way to mitigate the complaints and mitigate the settlements against him. Now, there's a very detailed explanation in this indictment of the bankruptcy law. You can click the link in the description if you want to read over it for yourself, but I've basically given you all that you need to know as it pertains to this case, so I'd like to move forward. So, what they are alleging is that the defendant herein devised and intended to devise a scheme to defraud, and for the purpose of executing and concealing the scheme and attempting to do so, filed and caused to be filed a petition commencing bankruptcy under Title 11 of the United States Code, filed documents in a bankruptcy case under Title 11 of the United States Code, and made materially false and fraudulent representations concerning and in relation to a proceeding under Title 11 at the time before and after filing the petition. So what is Acting Chief Lacey accused of lying about? Well, it's actually a number of things. So first and foremost, of course, he is materially misrepresenting his income. He said that his net income, which is after all the necessary expenses, is in and around $670. In other places, he says it's $603, but you need to understand that these cases go on for years, and that is not unusual for your income to change. However, what the court is alleging is that his net income, net household income, is actually substantially higher. Now, he says his gross income is around $5,300, and just like his net income, that gross income is also being underplayed in the bankruptcy court in more than a few ways. So one of the ways that it's being underplayed is that active police chief Lacey has told the court that he is separated from his wife and she is no longer a contributing member to the household. However, what investigators discovered is that he was not separated from his wife. He is married to her, she is paying bills on the mortgage and all these different other things, and he essentially lied about this with his non-filing partner, that's what that means in this paperwork, in order to conceal his income. This is a big no-no in bankruptcy court. On top of that, he said that he only had 2 Bank of America accounts, period. That's where his money was. That's what they needed to look into. But it turns out that's not even true in terms of the number of accounts that he has at Bank of America. He had a 3rd account at Bank of America, plus additional bank accounts, one at JP Morgan Chase and some at other places that he was clearly and obviously stashing money away in order to avoid being judged based on the income that he actually had. And by the way, his income is about to get a whole bunch more scrutiny, and this is where the Lightfoot report comes into play, because if you'll remember, what we found is that acting police chief Lewis was making a ton of money in overtime.
We thought it also important for you to know that acting chief Lacey has accumulated overtime. It's our understanding that he is not part of the collective bargaining unit and has not been for some time, which under normal circumstances would mean that he is not entitled to overtime. But as you can see here, for FY22, FY23, and FY24, and we're now in fiscal year 2025, through those 4 years, he's accumulated $215,747,000 just in overtime.
Now, it's important for you guys to understand that these cases are old. Again, they're filed in 2019. I don't know if they extend all the way up until now, but this is another potential legal issue from him because according to Lori Lightfoot, this position, this politically appointed position, is not subject to the same collective bargaining agreement, thus is not eligible for overtime in the same way that the officers are eligible for overtime. So Lacey making $200,000+ in this position is also another legal issue, and if he's still in the midst of any kind of bankruptcy situation and he's been concealing this income, this could spell disaster for acting police chief Lacey. Now, I also want to point out that in 2019, Lacey said that he was $171,000 in debt, and that includes the $43,000 owed to the plaintiff as a part of the settlement in that state case. Now, we don't really have a breakdown of this $171,000 in debt. I am hoping, for the sake of logic and reason, that this is mostly mortgage debt, which is actually not that big of a deal. But if this is credit card debt, if this is a crippling financial situation for the acting police chief, this is obviously something that you should be on the lookout for before you appoint him to that position, because this could lead him to be compromised. Again, it just goes to show you the lack of logic and foresight in the supermayor's governing philosophy, unless this is actually intentional, because she put a guy in position that owes a bunch of money, that has all these pending cases, that has a sketchy past, allows him to make all this money in overtime that's not legal for him to make anywhere else, because he's not a part of the collective bargaining agreements that are argued out in the state of Illinois. And this obviously is going to compromise his position as an officer, compromise his position as the leader of officers, because he is in desperate need of the income that he's earning in order to cover his debts. Now, as things moved on from 2019 to 2020, the number of $173,000 in debts actually jumped up to over $180,000. And while I was hopeful and optimistic that most of that would be the mortgage, the fact of the matter is it definitely is not the mortgage, because if you look closely in the fine print, this says unsecured debt. So we're talking credit card debt, consumer debt, all sorts of issues where this guy does not have collateral, aka something securing the debt, which means he's incredibly compromised. Again, a guy who owes $200,000+ is installed as the acting police chief under a corrupt mayor. What do you think he's going to do except for enforce that corruption? Because nobody else would dare put him in this position. Again, this is an absolute disaster for the village of Dalton, a giant red flag, and this might ultimately end up leading to this guy flipping on the supermayor, because I believe you can get 5 years in prison for each of the counts that he's indicted on, and so far he's indicted on 9 counts. Now, Lacey also reported that his wife's address was somewhere else when she was living with him, and they have proof allegedly of him paying his mortgage. So again, it looks like this man is caught, he's dead to rights, but there is a defense that is percolating from his attorney, and I do want to present it to you in the sake of fairness. I also want to say say that this is alleged right now. The feds are going after him. This actually is likely a means to an end, so maybe, just maybe, they're trumping up the charges in order to flip this person. But the fact of the matter is, when you're talking about something like a bankruptcy fraud, either he signed the statements under penalty of perjury or he didn't. So to me, he is pretty much dead to rights on this, but it's still alleged. We still don't know what are the details of this. We haven't seen the documents. All we've seen is the indictment. So let's hear from the response from the defense team so you can get an idea of where they're going with this right now in this moment.
That's exactly what the U.S. attorney does every single time. They start with people that they believe that they can flip. They go down the line. They show up at 6 o'clock in the morning when a person is not lawyered up, when a person is just waking up, and they're telling you, oh, I'm here to talk to you and be nice to you and don't worry about it. And you're not under arrest. And then we're going to leave and we're not going to arrest you today. But here are some questions that we have for you. So immediately a person puts his foot in the mouth and from there, the fish is caught.
Is that what they did with Lacey?
To a certain degree, yes.
So right off the top, I just want to say, this does not look good for Acting Chief Lacey as of this moment, because what this guy just said was that the FBI showed up to his house at 6 o'clock in the morning, he wasn't lawyered up, and he put his foot in his mouth. And this is something that happens to a lot of people, and it's honestly pretty sad. But if you look at the indictment on the bankruptcy case, this doesn't have to do with him perjuring himself to the FBI. This is all old stuff, court filings and whatnot. So what he's saying is that his client might have been as much of an idiot as we could have imagined and said something false to the FBI, didn't lawyer up immediately in that situation, and that might lead to additional charges. Now, of course, he's going to go for the perjury trap. He's going to go for it being about the supermayor. And to be perfectly honest, this is quite possibly and largely due to the supermayor, since these are old counts that they decided to adjudicate now. So yeah, this isn't looking good. When your attorney's talking about you putting your foot in your mouth and messing up, that likely means that he's going to be looking for a deal. So we're probably going to see the acting police chief Lacey flip on the supermayor. Now, of course, this guy was actually fired by the village of Dalton just last week. They put him on paid administrative leave. He ended up showing to work. He said that the trustees had no authority over him.
His employment status here in Dalton, a bit cloudy right now. Last week, the trustees placed him on paid administrative leave. He told me he was continuing to show up to work after that because they didn't have the power to put him on leave. The village then sent him a termination letter, and I'm told he kept showing up even after his firing.
So then they fired him, and he's still showing up to work, still saying that he's in that position because, again, he's desperate for that income. He's desperate for that overtime that he can't make anywhere else, and he knows once the supermayor's done, he's not going to be able to work as a police officer again until another corrupt Democrat ends up coming into power in some other city in Illinois. But yeah, it looks like this man is cooked, and it looks like the supermayor is running out of allies. She's being backed into a corner. So while she's saying in her Facebook Live that she's outside and anybody can approach her, she knows that her goose is cooked.
Woo! Superman, remember they said that I'm hiding. I'm outside. I'm always outside. I'm always reachable.
Now look, we have talked about time and time again how the walls are closing in on the supermayor. You had the Lightfoot report that dropped its preliminary findings just a couple of days ago. You have the state attorney general's office investigating her foundation, and we talked about the feds coming in, issuing indictments on Keith Freeman, and it appears that that investigation is moving forward. That being said, I have a lot of people out there in my audience that are quite skeptical of the FBI, so I want to know what you guys think about the supermayor, who we know to be corrupt, getting what's coming to her, getting her comeuppance. But if you feel a little salty about it, considering the FBI is using, according to the attorney at least, perjury traps in order to get additional charges. Now, I don't know if that's actually true, but that's what's being alleged by the attorney. So I just want to know what you guys think about all this down in the comments below. Now, as usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the police chief going down in flames. Till next time.